Here we are studying Greek together again in Gerald Stevens' Introduction to the Greek, his Greek primer, and this video will cover chapter 8, which is on the subject of adjectives. Now, what are adjectives? Adjectives are, in English, we think about them as one of the 8 parts of speech. So one of the 4 primary parts of speech because they're so commonly used. We think of adjectives in language as basically functioning to do 2 things. One major thing is it functions as a modifier of nouns. That's usually what we think of when we think of adjectives, the good book or a great movie. Great or good in those examples would be adjectives modifying nouns. Another thing they often can do is function basically as nouns. They can substitute as nouns in a sentence, like the good is what we're after here, something like that. In that sentence, good is functioning like a noun. Now, here's the thing. In English, adjective functions in such a way that it modifies its noun by, English shows word order in order to indicate this. This is what Dr. Stevens is talking about on page 89. English shows word order, and it always does the same way, unless it's trying to be poetic. It precedes the noun to which it modifies. So we always say good book, fast car. We don't say car fast, book good. We always follow word order in English unless we're trying to be poetic. And we put the adjective first, then the noun that it modifies, and that's how we know of the relationship. Well, remember what Dr. Stevens says in this chapter as well, as he said in many chapters, in Greek, because it's an inflected language, word order doesn't function. It doesn't use word order in order to communicate word function in a sentence like English does. So in English, word order is everything. In Greek, we're going to find out later in intermediate that word order only matters for emphasis. It doesn't indicate function. Okay? So its adjectives can float around their nouns, and instead it uses inflection in order to show the relationship between words. We saw this, for example, in chapter 6 with the article. The article is in concord with its noun. Well, the same thing's going to work with the adjectives. Adjectives that are modifying nouns are going to be in concord with the noun that they're modifying, which means, remember, what something means to be in concord means it's parallel or in the same case, gender, and number. Case being nominative, genitive, accusative, dative, gender being masculine, feminine, neuter, and then number being singular or plural. So nouns, kind of like articles, are going to function in concord with adjectives, kind of like articles, are going to function in concord with the noun that they are modifying. So, but here's the good news. So, because they're going to, you're probably thinking, okay, wait a minute. So you're talking about now we're learning adjectives, and you're saying they too are inflected, which means I got to learn a whole bunch of new paradigms for adjectives like I did for nouns. Well, here's the good news. The answer is no. You do not have to learn any new paradigms. Why? This is it. Because in Greek, the adjectives use the same endings as the nouns, the same inflection patterns. So, for example, with the nouns, you learned 3 inflection patterns. Remember? First declension, second declension, third declension. And you had these little paradigms and sets with them. In chapter 4, you learned the second declension endings. Masculine and feminine had a set, neuter had a set. And chapter 5, you learned the first declension, which had several sets. It had like 5 different sets, but really all those sets come from 2 basic sets. That is the alpha pure and the eta pure endings. Then it had some mixed and things like that. But that's the second declension endings, alpha pure, eta pure. And then you had in chapter 7 the third declension endings, which were some of those consonant endings that had no thematic vowel. Well, if you know your 3 declension endings, then you know the endings for adjectives, because adjectives use the same 3 declension endings, so no new declensions to learn. What he's basically going to point out to you on the bottom of page 89, 90, and then on to the top of 91 is he's going to kind of give you some heads up on concord issues. Here's the thing you got to know about adjectives. Adjectives are going to use the 3 declension patterns, but they're going to differ in their gender. So adjectives, for example, you may have an adjective that in its feminine form will follow one of the 3 declensions, but in its masculine form may follow a completely different declension. If you know your declension endings, you're going to locate it. But he's just trying to point out on the bottom of page 89 and the top of page 90 Just know that adjectives can have, in its masculine, feminine, and neuter forms, different declensions. It's taking its endings for different declensions. So just because it has, for example, just because it has maybe in its masculine form that a particular adjective has a second declension endings with the os, the omicron sigma endings, and the omicron upsilon for genitive singular and all those. Just because it has in its masculine form, say, a second declension, doesn't mean in its feminine form it's going to have second declension as well. It may borrow from first declension in that form. And he gives you several examples of these on page 90 of some of these that'll have what he calls mixed declensions in its various gender forms. But here's the thing. They're always, no matter what the declension ending, the adjective is always going to be in concord with the noun it's modifying. And all he's trying to give you a heads up on in concord issues on bottom of page 90, top of page 91, is he's giving you a heads up and saying, hey, just be aware that sometimes the spelling will not match, but that doesn't mean it's not in concord. Take his first example on page 91 at the very top. Tes hageas hadu, hadu. This is a diphthong there. So the way you translate is the holy way or path. That's the word for path or way. Now notice here we've got the article, we've got the adjective, and we have got the noun. And so what he's basically trying to point out to you is that you have these spellings won't match, but don't be fooled. This is still a genitive feminine singular adjective, a genitive feminine singular noun, and a genitive feminine singular article. They're looking different because the adjective is borrowing from a different declension than this is. So this u in this noun comes from second declension. If you look back to chapter 4, look at your masculine feminine declension endings, and you'll see this is your genitive singular declension. I know it's feminine only because I have to recognize that with the vocabulary word. Remember, this could be masculine or feminine. Most second declensions are masculine, but you get a few oddball ones that are feminine. How do you learn that? Only by connecting with vocabulary. So this is a feminine noun. It's going to take the second declension endings. This is an adjective that's going to be in concord, but this adjective, hagios, holy, in its feminine form is going to take from the alpha pure, first declension, which means you're going to have the alpha sigma. Go back and look at chapter 5 at the alpha pure chart, and you're going to see this for genitive feminine singular. So they're in concord, they just have different endings, and he's trying to clue you into that. By the way, a little throwback to chapter 6. In your article chapter, remember the point that Stevens made, and that is if you know your articles, you memorize that chart at the very first page on chapter 6 of the article, all the various article endings, then you'll be able to locate the noun because they're always in concord. And the thing about the reason the article is your friend in the Greek language is the article has a unique ending for all three genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter. So if I know my article here, chart here, then I know that tes, this is my genitive singular feminine ending. Even if I don't recognize this ending, even if I don't recognize this, I know I can locate this because it's going to be in concord. So my article tells me where the rest is to be located. They're going to be in concord. So if it has an article, the article is your friend. That's a throwback to chapter 6. Okay, so that's morphology of the adjectives. No new patterns to learn. Just recognize the point I made about different genders in the adjectives. If you know your first, second, and third declension, you're going to be able to locate the adjective in the same way you would a noun. Give the case, give the gender, give the number from the lexical root. And so that's that. The rest of the chapter is really about what we call function. And this is really when you start to get into some translation issues where we're going to start to think through how the Greek language uses adjectives. And so it has basically three main functions. An adjective can function three main ways in a sentence in the Greek language. And he's going to clue you, and this is true of English, by the way, but he's going to clue you into this, talk about this on the bottom page 91 and then for the next several pages. The three main ways are, the one we most often think of, attributive, which means that's what we normally think of as adjectives. It means to modify a noun attributively. If you say an adjective is functioning attributively, that means it's functioning as a noun. The second way is substantively, which means it's functioning, it's substituting like a surrogate, it's substituting for a noun, which means it's functioning, even though it's an adjective, in the sentence, it's not modifying a noun, it's functioning as a noun. So I think he gives you some examples. Look at the, let me finish. And then the third option is predicative. And this is when you have a copulative verb in the sentence. Copulative is or being verb. We used to talk about these, if you remember, from grammar school. In grammar school, I learned it as the linking verb. So when you have a linking, a copulative verb, an is or a be verb, then you can have an adjective functioning as the predicate of that copulative. So when you have a copulative verb, I'll write it on the board here real small. You have an is verb, okay? You're going to have a subject, and you're going to have a predicate, okay? He is tall. The he would be the subject, the copulative is the linking verb, and tall would be the predicate of the subject or the predicate of the copulative verb. In English, we make this relationship with word order. Whatever becomes before the is always the subject. It's not, if I could say the tall is boy, it wouldn't make much sense, but usually in English, your adjectives are your predicates, and it's communicated by word order. Well, in Greek, word order doesn't matter. So when you have a copulative verb, you can have an adjective that's functioning as the predicate, and it could be up front in the sentence. So we'll look at that in a second. But those are the three functions of an adjective: as a modifier, like we normally think of it, attributive; substantival, as a noun, could be the subject of a verb, could be the object of a verb, of a transitive verb, or as a predicative, as the object. Well, I say object; it's not really the best word. But as the predicate of a copulative verb, and it's always going to be in the predicate. Those adjectives are always in the predicate there. Now, so he's going to give you some examples of functions. So if you look down on page 91, an attributive would be she is a good student. Good is modifying student. In that sentence, what's the predicative? Not good, but student. Okay, student. You could just drop the good out and say she is a student. Student's the predicative of the copulative is. She is the subject. And good is an attributive adjective modifying student. Let's pretend for a moment I dropped the word student out and it just read she is good. Then good would not be attributive. It would be the predicative, the third function. Okay, and the substantive, he gives you an example on the top of page 92. We want the good of all. So the good is an adjective, but it's not modifying a noun in the sentence. It's functioning as a noun, and it is the object of the verb we want. What do we want? The good. The good is like a noun here, functioning as a noun, though it's really an adjective in form. So, and then the third one is predicative. Now, if you go, how do I know which three it is? He's going to give you a key in the middle of page 92. You need to highlight that. And the key is this. Adjective function is article. The key to adjective function is article construction. So if we're gonna learn to recognize and observe the article, and or the presence or the absence of the article, and that's going to tell us a lot more about its function, which of the three it is. So article is going to be key. Again, here we're going to find out that the article is our friend. So how does the article, page 92, 93, all the way down to 94, gosh, even into 94, all of those next three pages are him taking working that key out. How does the article construction, what does that tell us about one of the three functions? How does that tell us about which function it is? And that's what the next few pages are. So for example, in page 92, he's going to talk about articular construction. So when the adjective is articular, remember there are two article constructions. I should back up and remind us from chapter 6. Two article constructions. Articular, which means with the article, and then anarthrous, which means no article, just the noun or the verb. I mean the noun or the adjective. So if it's articular in construction, what he tells you in point number 1 is basically that next key point in the middle of page 93, and highlight that one. If the adjective is articular, which means it has an article directly preceding it, and there's a noun in concord in the neighborhood. What does he mean by in the neighborhood? That means it doesn't have to follow the adjective like it does in English. The good boy, the fast car. Doesn't have to follow the adjective. It could be up here. All we need to see is that it's in concord and it's in the neighborhood of the articular adjective. So if I have an articular adjective and there's a noun in the neighborhood that's in concord, guess what I have? He says you have automatically articular. Attributive. Attributive. So you would translate it, and he gives you this example here on the top of page 93. Ha agathos anthropos. Ha agathos anthropos. Remember, this is rough breathing, smooth breathing, smooth breathing. So it's not hagethos, it's agethos. Did I write that right? Yeah, sure did. Ha agethos anthropos. So here I have an adjective and I have a noun in the neighborhood. They're in concord. They agree, which means they agree in gender, number, and case, gender, and number. And there's an article with the adjective. So how do I translate it? This is attributive. The article is modifying the noun. And again, I could have this anthropos up here. It wouldn't matter because there's a noun in the neighborhood. The article is with the adjective. Then the adjective is functioning attributive. Now, you could have the adjective functioning in a substantival use, which is what he gets to in the middle of page 93. And one of the best ways to recognize this is if you have an adjective by itself, and it could be articular or an authoress without the article, but if it's articular and there is no noun in the neighborhood, then it's probably functioning as a noun. And he gives you an example here. I put it on the board. This is the Luke 20:37 on page 93. I didn't write the whole thing. I just wrote half a part of it there. And that the dead are raised. This is conjunctions here. And that or but that, depending on the context. And that. And here's your adjective. Nekroi. Hopefully you can see that on the board. Nekroi. Okay? Hoi nekroi. So hoi nekroi is the dead. And it's an adjective. But I see it has an article. There are no nouns in the neighborhood that are in conjunction. All I see here is two conjunctions. I see a verb, which, by the way, I don't know if you've had this vocabulary word at this point, probably not, but this vocabulary means to raise or to rise. And if I know my vocabulary word, even if you didn't, you can just look it up in your glossary, in your dictionary in the back. And if I know my endings, I can locate it. So try to locate this. And so here's the ending. This is the ending right here. So is it one of you've learned two of your, this is a present indicative. So you have two endings with their voice inflection, their voice differences. So you have those active endings. O-S-A, omen et usi. That's not it. O-S-A, omen et usi. Those are your present active endings. So let's go to our present middle passive endings. This is from chapter 3. Mai etai meteste untai. And there we go. Untai. So if I memorize my paradigm, I know this is a third person plural. It's present, middle passive, third person plural. And what we have here is what scholars often refer to as the divine passive. The who's doing the action. Remember, this is passive. The dead are not doing the action. They're not doing the raising. There's the subject, it's nominative, but it's being acted upon. They are being raised. And who's doing the raising? This is what scholars often refer to as a divine passive, common feature in Jewish communication, Jewish writing, carries over into the New Testament, in which God is the assumed subject of the verb. And they've ellipted God. They could have said God is raising the dead and made the dead in an accusative form and put hatheos, but they drop hatheos out and put it like this to emphasize this divine passive. God is doing it. It's assumed. So God is doing the raising here. My point is, you have an adjective with a noun, with an article, no noun in concord in the neighborhood. It must be substantival. It's functioning as a noun. Now, how do I know where to put it in a sentence? It's case. It's nominative plural. It's nominative plural. Therefore, it is the subject of the verb. That's how I know where to put it in a sentence. Okay, so that's articular and substantival function. What if the attributive and substantival function when it has the article? And he raises the question on the bottom page 93 and 94. What if it's anarthrous? What if you have an article, an adjective that has no article? What do you do with it then? Well, he says, unfortunately, those are a bit more ambiguous. But there are clues. It can be any one of the three. It can be attributive, it can be substantival, it could still be predicative. It all depends on the rest of the sentence. But he tries to give you some clues on page 94. And if you go, gosh, I got to memorize all these? No. You're going to use chapter 8 as a reference tool. You're going to find yourself translating or doing the exercises and having to look back through chapter 8. As he says at the beginning of this chapter, you're going to pick up on these various keys and functions and ways to translate as you go along. Translation is the best teacher on this. There's no memorizing this stuff. You just got to kind of learn it along the way. So he's just introducing it to you so you can kind of learn it through translation. And what he says here is if they're anarthrous on page 94, they're going to be ambiguous. It could be any one of them. And he gives you some clues. So for example, under the attributive number 1 function, he says attributive use is most likely if both adjective and noun are anarthrous. And he gives you an example here. Here's pan den thran agethan. Pan de thran agethan. The good tree. Every good tree. Every good tree. Sorry. This is every. This is tree. And this is good. So here's what he's saying. Got an adjective here. I got a noun here in concord. They're modifying somehow. But I don't have an article. They're both anarthrous. How do I know what this adjective is doing? Well, I've got a noun in the neighborhood that's concord. There's no article anywhere. It's probably, he says, most of the time, this is going to be attributive because we're trying to ask a question. What is this adjective doing? Is it attributive? Is it substantival of the verb? Is it predicative? Well, here I have a noun in the neighborhood, which means, and it's in concord. Both are anarthrous. It's probably going to be at that point attributive. So he's giving you some little clues. Substantival, he gives you some examples there in the middle of page 94. Look at that example. He says a substantival use is likely if no noun is in concord nearby. So if I just have the adjective and it has no article, what do I do with it? If I look around, I see no noun that's in concord, it's probably substantival, which means it's either the subject of the verb if it's in a nominative case, or it's the object of the verb if it's in an accusative case. So he gives you some examples there. For many are called, and he underlines the many is paloi gar. You see that? Paloi gar. Asin, which is the is or the being verb. The many are, and then kletoi, called. And he says in this case you have paloi, you have the kletoi, which are adjectives, but they're anarthrous. There's no article with them, and there's no noun anywhere to modify. So what's happening? Well, they're functioning as nouns themselves. Okay, so the many are, there's your verb, the many's the subject, are, and then call would be your predicative. Now the predicative function, which is the third function, is a form of sentence that utilizes, or it's a form of the adjective, a function of the adjective, I should say, that's utilized with a copulative verb. Here's what you need to know about copulative verbs. He's going to introduce this to you for the first time in this chapter. Copulative verbs are verbs that are what grammarians call intransitive, which means they do not transfer action to an object. When I say he hit the ball, what I'm saying is that the hit is a verb transferring action to something, in that sense, the ball. But in English, we have also copulative verbs. Back again, when I was in grammar school, maybe you as well, you learned these as linking verbs, right? They link two nouns or a noun and an adjective. It's a way of describing, really, is what it is. So we say, he is tall, or something like that. He is fast, something like that. So these are linking or copulative verbs, and an adjective can function as the predicate. Remember what I said a minute ago. So you have a subject, you have the copulative verb, and then you have the predicate. You go, why don't you call that a direct object? Because direct or indirect objects inherently have this grammatical idea of transfer of action. Is does not transfer action. Okay? Now, in Greek, your verbs for the copulative, for the is or the be, are two main ones, and that's ginomai and ami. And what he's trying to say in this whole section is that adjectives, that third function, could function as a predicative of one of these copulative verbs. So that's why he introduces the copulative verb here. And you'll know it because it'll be the complement of the copulative verb. In other words, you'll have an adjective and you'll have a copulative verb there. That's how you know it's predicative. There is another example on the next few pages, but what you need to know is this right away. So on page 95, gives you the only chart you need to memorize. So far, I haven't given you any endings, any charts to memorize. There's only one in this chapter, and that's it. And he makes a suggestion. It's a good suggestion. And that is, you may want to think about the Emmy paradigm. You see Emmy there? That's the most common of these two. You'll see ginomai some, but Emmy is the most common in the New Testament, and you'll see this a lot, like a lot. So he says, instead of trying to learn it as a paradigm, just learn it as vocabulary words. Learn Emmy as I am. Learn A as you are, and so on and so forth, all the way down the chart. My blank marker here is running out of ink. Learn A as you are, see that there? And all the way down. Estén as he, she, or it is. Esmen as we are. Este, I'm going right down the chart. And asen, at the very bottom there, you get asen with the removable nu. Again, what he's saying is just memorize asen as they are. You might want to make separate vocabulary cards. You'll see these so common. You'll just memorize them through translation. Every time I see that, I know it's he, she, or it is, they are, so on and so forth. So those are the only, think of them as 6 vocabulary words, and those you need to memorize. Here's the other thing. When you locate an Emmy verb or a copulative verb, whether it be ginomai or Emmy, you need to know that there is no voice to this. So if I were to locate Emmy, I would say this is a present indicative first person singular. If I were to locate asen, I would say this is a present indicative third person plural. They are from Emmy. That's the lexical form, Emmy. Now, why doesn't it have voice? Because voice is an aspect of transitive verbs only. Voice transfers action. So it's either going to be active or middle passive. But in a copulative verb, you don't have transfer of action. It simply is or be. It's a being verb. And so voice is just simply not there. So if you locate this present active indicative first person plural, you're going to actually be incorrect on part of that because there's no active to it. Okay, so just know that he tells you that on the bottom of page 95. And then I think this is there's 2 more aspects to this chapter. So if I have a copulative verb like Emmy, what's going to happen is I'm going to have at least 1 nominative, if not 2 nominatives. And 9 times out of 10, most of the time I'm going to have 2 nominatives. And if one of those is an adjective, or I have 2 nominatives, let's put it this way, if I have 2 nominatives with an Emmy verb, how do I know which one is the subject and which one is the predicate? Because the subject comes here, and the predicate comes here. Now in English, we do this with word order. Whatever comes before the is the subject. Whatever comes after the is the predicate. Okay, but in Greek, this is not the case. Word order doesn't matter. You can have the Emmy up here with 2 nominatives up here. You could actually have them like this, but on the wrong side in the Greek. So how do we determine if we have 2 nominatives with an Emmy, a copulative? How do we determine which one is the subject, which one is predicate? That's what that chart on page 96, 8.3 is all about. All you have to do is follow this sort of hierarchy of thinking. Level 3 is pronoun. That trumps everything. So if one of those 2 nominatives is a pronoun, doesn't matter what the other nominative is. The pronoun is the subject every time. If you have 2 nominatives, neither one is a pronoun, you go to the next level. Level 2, is one of them a proper name? If one of them is a proper name, then that trumps, and that one goes subject. So what if I have a pronoun and a proper name? Well, level 3, the pronoun trumps the proper name. See how that works? Well, what if I have 2 nominatives and an Emmy verb, and I don't have a pronoun, neither one of them is a proper name, then you go to the third and lowest level, which one is articular. If neither is articular, then context determines. If both are articular, which you get on occasion, not that often, he gives you an example of middle of page 97, the lamp of the body is the eye. In that sentence, both nominatives are articular, and the way you determine which one is the subject is only through context. A little tougher. But notice his examples. Level 1, on top page 97, you have Kurios gar esten tu sabatu ha huios tu anthropu. So this is for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. But notice how it's written. The first word, kurios, which is underlined twice in your book on page 97, is a noun. You get gar, which is for. Esten, there's your emi verb. And if you've memorized your 6, you know which one that is. So esten is that third person singular. So you've got 2 nouns here in this sentence. You got kurios, which is underlined twice at the beginning. And then somewhere toward the end, you got ha huios. You see that? Ha huios, the little omicron with the rough breathing mark, and then huios, the son, and then the last word is of man. So which one is the subject? Is it the Lord is the Son, or is it Lord is the Son, or is it the Son of Man is Lord? How do you know which one's subject? You go through your 3-level chart. Is either one of those two nominatives? So you've got ha huios, which is son. You got kurios, which is Lord. Is either one of those a pronoun? No. Go to level 2. Is either one of those a proper name? No. You go to level 3. Is either one of those articular, which means it has the article? There, the word son, huios, has the omicron there's the article. The little omicron with the rough breathing. Ha huios. It's the subject. That's everything. That's what table 8.3, page 97 is just giving you examples of all 3 levels. And then on to the top of page 98. Here's the last thing you need to know about adjectives. Sometimes in Greek, I say sometimes, this is actually quite common in the New Testament, you have an idiom in Greek known as the verbless predicative, the verbless predicate function. Now, this is an idiom in Greek. They developed a way to write a sentence, a copulative sentence, without having the actual emi or genobai verb in the sentence. In other words, they could communicate a copulative idea without actually writing the word. And they did this, as he's going to talk about on page on number B there, verbless predicate function on page 98. He's going to talk about this there. You could have a noun and an adjective, and you have to supply the is in translation. You're not actually going to see it in the Greek. You go, well, how do I know I'm supposed to supply? How do I know it's not attributive and that adjective's functioning as a predicate nominative when there's no emi verb in this form? And he's going to give you the key. Anotherous adjectives, whenever you have an adjective that's an anotherous, has no article, with an articular noun, if both are nominative, and that's the key, they have to both be in the nominative case. If both are nominative, then what you probably have here is a verbless predicative, and you have to supply the is to make sense of it. So he's going to give you some examples on page 98 there. Let me write one on the board. So this first one is pistos ha theos. Okay, so pistos ha theos. This is like faith. Faith. And then you have God with an article. So here I've got an adjective, I've got a noun. What's the relationship of these two? He says when you have an adjective and a noun, there's no copulative verb. This is it. This is all you have. And the noun is articular and the adjective is anotherous, which means it doesn't have an article. What I have to do, this is the Greek idiom, and I have to supply the word is in my translation because it's implied. This is an idiom. It's implied. They can communicate it without actually writing it. And I know in this case, I have the articular noun, or even this is also a proper name, or a proper noun, so it would be the subject. So it's not faithful is God, it's God is faithful. And this adjective is functioning as the predicative of the copulative verb, which is not actually written out. This is an idiom. And the only way to recognize it, you'll trip over it a few times. Only way to recognize it is you're going to get an adjective that does not have an article. You're going to get a noun in concord. No, and it has the article. No verb there. Okay, this is what we would call the verbless predicative, and you'll have to supply the word is to make sense. And he gives you a couple of examples there. That's the gist of. He's going to talk a little bit more about some adjectives that are exceptions on page 99. That's basically what you need to know about adjectives. So let's recap. What have you learned? Oh, one last thing before I recap. Page 107, your vocabulary list. Notice he's going to give you a bunch of adjectives in your vocabulary list. In Greek dictionaries, lexicons, and in your vocabulary list, adjectives are always going to be listed with all three of its forms. Okay, he explains this in vocabulary note number 1. So look at the first entry on page 107. Agathos, agethe, agethon, good or useful. You get it in its masculine form, in its feminine form, and then in its neuter form. All adjectives are going to be giving you all three forms. Remember what we learned at the beginning of the chapter, that adjectives can often draw from a different declension depending on its gender. In its feminine gender, masculine gender, neuter gender, it'll have different declension endings, first, second, and third declension endings. And so in order to indicate that, in the vocabulary forms of Greek dictionaries, they always give you all three. It's one of the ways you can recognize the word as an adjective and not a noun, because they'll give you all three. So that's what you need to know about that vocabulary. So what have we learned? We've learned that there's only one paradigm or set of vocabulary words to memorize, and that's the AME chart. The AME, just learn those vocabulary words. There's no new endings. There's no new paradigm endings to adjectives. You learn they basically use the first, second, third declensions of nouns. You learn they're always in concord with the noun they modify, and they can function of one of three ways: as attributive, modifying a noun; as substantival, which means as a noun itself, usually a subject or an object of a transitive verb; or as a predicative of a copulative verb. You also learn that there's this idiom in Greek where you can write a sentence not actually writing the verb, the copulative is verb, AME verb, by putting it in this kind of a construction: a noun with the article, adjective with no article, the is has to be supplied. And that is the adjective of the Greek language.